So as far as the goaltenders are concerned, obviously the big story in the offseason, Jeremy Swayman and his contract extension and the fate of his future in Boston, but also the big trade of Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators. And over the last couple of years, Judd, the best one of the best, if not the best 1-2 punch in the National Hockey League, winning the Jennings Trophy a couple of years ago. Obviously, Linus was a Vezina Trophy winner here. And, that was the backbone of the Boston Bruins. But as Don Sweeney had said, both goaltenders wanted to start 55 games, and the math just doesn't add up. So something had to give, and ultimately Linus Ullmark was traded to the Ottawa Senators. And that is a big storyline going into the season, because in return, the Bruins did get a veteran goaltender in Joonas Korpisalo, and it is well documented that Korpisalo's numbers were not good in Ottawa last year. And again, there are a multitude of reasons for that. So obviously, there wasn't a good team in front of him defensively by the numbers, and so that's one of the reasons. But this is an interesting project, and I'll call it a project, and it's by means no disrespect to a veteran goaltender in the National Hockey League, but I call it that because now Bob Essenza, goalie Bob, gets to work with Korpisalo, and they've been breaking down video, and I'm really fascinated by this, Judd. I'm really intrigued to see how Korpisalo and goalie Bob work together.
I think you're going to see a very different Joonas Korpisalo. Since you referenced what he went through last year with a very different Ottawa team, add these layers to it. So he went through an ownership change, a GM change, a coaching change, a number of different key injuries, and they were missing a number of key players for the Ottawa Senators last year. So I think it was going to be very difficult for that team to win games last year, and ultimately they missed the playoffs. This is a completely different situation and a much more stable situation with a far different group of defensemen, a far different foundation, a far different structure, and and to take it one step further, the expectations are drastically different. If you talk to guys around the National Hockey League, I think one of the things that is clear is everybody wants to win, but not everybody understands how to do it. So I think that Joonas Korpisalo being in this situation in many ways, now do I think he's going to win a Vezina like Linus Ullmark? I don't know. That'd be great for the Bruins if he did, but I do think being in this situation in the same way that Ullmark was able to take advantage of it, I think Korpisalo has the opportunity to do it. We were in Quebec City the other night for the game against the Los Angeles Kings, Joonas Korpisalo's old team. And what was clear in talking to some of the Kings people, they wanted to keep him. They really liked him. But they just could not match the number that the Ottawa Senators threw out for that long-term deal. So I think I almost want to take last year's numbers and put an asterisk by them because I think they're going to look drastically different playing here. You mentioned Bob Essenza. I'm going to add one more name to that. He also can lean on a guy like Tuukka Rask. And in talking to Joonas, and I know you've had a chance to talk to him here during training camp, he said, growing up as a kid, I wanted to be Tuukka. He was my guy. I mimicked my game after him. It didn't always look that way. I was a little bit all over the track, whereas Tuukka was completely under control. But like a lot of Finnish goaltenders, he was the guy. He was the guy that I wanted to be. And it was such a thrill to play against him in the 2019 Stanley Cup playoffs when he was with Columbus. I think he will be a vastly improved goaltender for the Bruins. How many starts he gets, I don't know. Going back to the number that you had mentioned with GM Don Sweeney, when he had talked in his exit meetings with Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark, that both of those guys wanted to start 55 games. Math is not my strong suit, but that would put Korpisalo at 27 games. Can you get 27 good games out of him, or somewhere around 30? Because that number may fluctuate a little because Swayman's getting maybe a late start to the season since he didn't have a chance to participate in training camp. I don't see any reason why the Bruins can't get 30 quality starts out of a guy like Joonas Korpisalo. And I think whether it comes to Korpisalo or even a guy like Jeremy Swayman, stop the pucks that you're supposed to stop. And I think he'll have a much better opportunity of doing that this year than he's had in years past.
I was just curious to see how many goaltenders started 55 games last year in the National Hockey League. 8 of them did. And among those 8 are, I believe, the other goalies who are paid more than Jeremy Swayman, right? So you have Sergei Bobrovsky in there. You have Connor Hellebuck in there. Igor Shesterkin is going to get a big deal coming up. You have Sorokin in
Andrei
there.
Vasilevsky would have, not to cut you off, but Andrei Vasilevsky would have started more had he not come off of back surgery.
Yep. Good point. But he still ended up starting 52 games. So he almost got to that 55 number when all said and done.
To play him every
considering
night.
I believe his season started either late November or December, that's a lot of games in a short amount of time. But he's the big cat, right? And that's what you expect out of your primetime players. Leading the league last year, by the way, UC Saros, 64 starts. And he just got a big payday as well. So that's what you expect out of your starting goaltender, your star goaltender, and Jeremy Swayman is their star goaltender. Certainly has the contract to that, again, would back that up. But that's going to be a big storyline going into the year, Judd.
One point on that, though, Adam, I think in years past, so if you look at Swayman and Ullmark, Rask and Halak, you can even go back further. I don't know exactly what the sweet spot is. So even though Jeremy Swayman has picked up this 8-year, $66 million deal, does that mean he hits 55 games? That's one of the things that you don't know. And you've got a competent backup in a guy like Joonas Korpisalo, who's played, this will be his 10th year in the National Hockey League. So a lot of this is going to come down to the goaltending coach, Bob Essenza, in conjunction with Jim Montgomery, the head coach, and I'm sure the Bruins brass is going to weigh in on this as well. What's the sweet spot so you get the best performance out of both guys? It doesn't have to be 55 games. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's a little bit less. They could have certainly in years past gone a little bit more with a guy like Tuukka Rask, but I think there may have been a feeling that they had gotten diminished returns. And for some of those guys that play all of those games, I think there's a concern around the National Hockey League. How does that impact those goaltenders once they hit the playoffs? So what the sweet spot ultimately is, maybe we don't have a real idea of it this year because it's a different situation and Jeremy Swayman didn't participate in training camp. And if you have the same 2 goaltenders next year, maybe we can have this conversation again. What is the sweet spot for the amount of starts to get the best out of both guys?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And I think the narrative was that Jeremy Swayman would start 55 games because outside of the Bruins room and, the media pundits are talking about Joonas Korpisalo in the year that he had in Ottawa last year and say, you don't want that guy starting more than, 25 games next year. But again, we talked about it. It's a completely different situation in Boston. Again, working with goalie Bob, having the D-core in front. And by the way, that's another reason why you can maybe afford to start Korpisalo more than some of these names that I mentioned, because the fact that you have a strong defensive unit in front of whoever the goaltender is. So let's move on a little bit to the Bruins top line. The projected top line, it will be the top line going in to the game against the Panthers. Elias Lindholm, the new addition for the Bruins. He'll be centering a line with Pavel Zacha and David Pastrnak. We talked a lot in the preseason about what the addition of Elias Lindholm means for the Bruins. They have a true, top 6 center who can win faceoffs, who can provide the Bruins with somebody in the bumper with a right shot, which is something that they missed last year. They started off the year, of course, Pavel Zacha in the bumper spot, lefty shot after years of having Patrice Bergeron there. Now they get Lindholm there. And, Judd, before we dive in, just your thoughts on the addition of Elias Lindholm.
Oh, I think it's a great addition. Great free agent signing by the Bruins during the offseason. You touched on some of the ways that he's going to influence the Bruins, playing with David Pastrnak and Pavel Zacha. And just to dive into some of those details. So one of the things Pastrnak was excited about, having another right-handed centerman, which is, and I talked with Andy Brickley about this when Brick and I were talking, I think it was in Lindholm's first preseason game, which is somewhat odd because normally You would think a left-handed centerman who's looking on his forehand to the right side would be something that Pastrnak would be more accustomed to, but I think he's so used to playing with a guy, or was used to playing with a guy like Patrice Bergeron. He likes the idea of playing with a right-hander again. The other thing, you mentioned the bumper, being a right-hander on that power play, and it's something that Jim Montgomery had talked about at practice today, that Pastrnak, Marchand, and McAvoy, who are all a part of that number one power play unit, they're used to having a right-handed bumper. So that's going to help. He's going to help you win faceoffs, both on the power play, on the penalty kill, 5-on-5, when you need to win a draw in your own zone to be able to protect the lead late. That was an area where the Bruins had some difficulties at certain points last year in faceoffs, so he can help you there. I think when it comes to the top line, though, Adam, one of the things that we'll have to try and take a look at early on is how long does it take for these guys to start to generate some chemistry? Because Lindholm missed a good chunk of time during preseason and during training camp. And training camp's not that long anyway. Lindholm only ended up playing in 2 games. And it wasn't always with Zacha and Pastrnak. So how long does that take for him to get acclimated to those guys and also get acclimated to the Bruins system? When we talked the other day after the game in Quebec City, he mentioned it's not all that different than the system that he played in Calgary, but in many ways, it's like Nikita Zadorov. There are some subtle changes, but this is his 3rd system in 2 years, because he played for 2 teams last year in Calgary and Vancouver, and now he comes here to Boston. So that's going to take a little time. So he's not thinking about where he's supposed to be, and at the same time starts to try and generate some cohesion with Zacha and Pastrnak. But I think it's a great signing. It's going to help the Bruins in a number of different ways.